KSHMR is considered by many to be one of the most popular EDM producers in history, and a big reason for that is because his mixes always sound clean and powerful. He's often revered for being one of the best mixing engineers in the EDM industry, and all his songs sound perfect. But there's a strategy that he uses that we can implement in our production to make sure that we also get a clean and powerful mix every time, and that's what I'm going to be showing you today. What's up guys, my name is Jacoby Jones. I'm a DJ producer hoping to spread some good vibes with my music and my content and help you become a better producer with production and marketing strategies that I've learned over 8 years of production. If you like what I'm giving out, make sure to subscribe. That way I can keep delivering for you. If not, let me know in the comments what I'm doing wrong and I'll try to improve for you soon. But I don't want to waste any more time. Let's get into this. So before we can get into the strategy that KSHMR uses with his mixes, we need to make sure we actually understand the definition of mixing, because this is something a lot of producers get wrong. Most people think that mixing is what separates amateur producers from professional producers, but this isn't usually the case. Usually it falls in the line of sound design, sound selection, and things like that that are much more important for your production, arrangement, songwriting, much more important for your production than things like mixing. So I encourage you to make sure that you have all of those at the best they can be before you even start thinking about mixing. So what is mixing really? Mixing is not making your sounds professional. It's making your sounds that are already there work together. It's not improving the quality of your sounds. That's sound design. That's completely different. Mixing is just taking all of the sounds that already exist in your track and making them work together as one cohesive unit. This is a misconception that's common in the music industry, so I want to make sure that we have that out of the way. But now that we have explained that, let's get into what KSHMR does to make his mixes sound professional. So, what makes KSHMR's mixes so clean, this is a strategy that he's explained that he does, is not a great use of compression or anything like that. It's not what you may think. It's actually prioritization. And what I mean by this is understanding what in your track is the most important elements that you want to stand out, and what are the important elements that should be more supportive, that are not necessarily needing to stand out. So I recommend that we actually create a list of priorities within our track that are going to allow us to understand what is the most important things in our track. Then we can use that priority list across every technique in mixing, whether it be volume, dynamics, compression, stereo imaging. And we're going to be getting into that in a few minutes, but we need to make sure we understand what are the important elements in a mix. So generally, the more important elements that we want to stand out are the lead, the kick, the bass, and the vocal. Those are usually the most important. So the priority list, those should be at the top. But more supportive elements could be your chords, your ambiance, and your effects. So I encourage you to go to your track and actually create a list of priorities from the most important elements that you want the listener to hear and the less important elements that are not super important. And we're going to be using this list of priorities throughout why we mix. So let's go over some techniques on how we can use this list of priorities. The first way we can use our priority list that we just created is with volume. Volume is by far the most important thing when it comes to music production mixing, in my opinion. Most mixing problems can come down to volume. It's not a compression problem, your dynamics are not off, the EQ's not bad. Usually it's volume. Say your kick isn't standing out. A lot of people will think, oh, my kick's not punchy enough, I gotta increase the compression or do some EQ on a boost or something like that. Or maybe your kick is just too quiet and you need to turn it up. And the reason it might be too quiet is because you didn't prioritize. Your chords are now louder than your kick, but the kick is a higher priority than the chords. That's why we created our list. So now we know what is the most important. Say your vocal is your #1 priority. You want that to be louder than every other element in the track. That way it's standing out. You're gonna do this, start from 0 and make the loudest element the most important, right? And then work your way down your list of priorities, balancing everything with volume. This is going to help ensure that you have a balanced mix following the list of priorities. KSHMR does this all the time. He said it in a few of his master classes and on his program, I believe. So you can use priorities with volume to make sure that you have a balanced mix every time. Another way you can use the concept of prioritization is with stereo imaging. So stereo imaging, as you know, is making things feel wider or more narrow in the mix using stereo and mono placement. It's also making things farther and closer using localization. Now, let's take a look at our list of priorities, right? We now know what is the most important things. And a good rule of thumb is the more important elements, you want to have at least some mono signal, something coming through the center so that way they can be heard. And the less important elements can usually be wider because they're surrounding the more important element and don't need to be heard as presently. So let's take a look at our priorities and think about how we can do this. Say you have a kick or a bass. You want those to stand out because they're high priorities. Because of this, these should be more in the mono section. But stuff like your ambiance or your effects are less important, and so, because they're a lower priority, we can generally place those a little wider. Having a list of priorities is going to help us make sure that we have an understanding going into our mixing process, and we basically have a roadmap laid out for us with every single technique. We can also do this with EQ. We already know how to do this with the sub. We prioritize that less than 100 frequency range for the sub when we cut out the sub of everything else to make sure we don't have a muddy mix. This is a commonly known thing. But there are other ways that we can do this. We can prioritize other parts of the frequency spectrum. Like the ultra highs, we can leave for cymbals and effects. Or the mids, we can make sure that we have more mid room for the lead or the vocal. Now, one technique that you can use when prioritizing is called frequency masking. So you've got a lot of elements, say in the 500 to 1000 range, and the main elements going on there are your lead and say a bass, right? Now, thinking about that, the lead is a bigger priority than your bass in your song because you made your list of priorities, especially in that 500 to 1000 range. You don't need as much bass there. So what you can do is actually take away some of that 500 to 1000 frequencies in the bass, and that's going to help the lead stand out because now those frequencies in the song are made for the bass and it's going to sound less cluttered. It's a way you can use prioritization in your mix to make sure that you have a cleaner sound across the board. So those are just a few of the ways you can use prioritization in your mix down to make sure that you have a cleaner mix every time. Prioritization is the key to mixing, in my opinion. It's how I go about it, and I know how KSHMR goes about it and many other artists. You can use it in other ways in mixing as well, making sure your dynamics are in order. Also your arrangement, prioritizing certain things in your arrangement of the track as the track develops. There's tons of ways to use prioritization to improve your mix, and I recommend you go and try this out. Hopefully it'll work for you, just like it has for countless others. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it helped you out and help you make your way towards a mix that sounds more clean and more powerful. If you enjoyed this video, maybe consider subscribing. That way I can keep delivering great videos to you and hopefully help you out. Make sure to follow my Instagram at Jacoby Jones Music to get a more personal look into my life as a producer, and also join a family of people looking to feel free with their music and dance to great vibes. My name is Jacoby Jones, and I'll see you next time.